Hi, I'm Mark Reed. Follow me as I attempt to put my new book, Impact Culture, into practice and discuss it with others taking a similar journey. You'll get tips that will help you achieve more impact from your research and stay healthy, no matter how busy you are. Rediscover your purpose. Lead from behind to empower those around you. Transform your work culture. Welcome to Season 4 of the Fast Track Impact Podcast. So we are starting our series of podcast episodes on evaluating impact. I've been talking about this for a while now and looking forward to this a lot because people find this incredibly useful. This is not just about demonstrating to your funder or your institution or some kind of research evaluation exercise that, honest, I did have impact. Although, it's kind of important to do that sometimes. This is also about us understanding what's working and what's not working so that we can do better impact, that works more effectively, that is more responsible. So in the next few episodes, not quite sure exactly where this is going to go. I'm going to have a few special guests, which I'm looking forward to interviewing and discussing this stuff with. We're going to start today by just recapping exactly what it is that we are measuring and making sure we don't fall into some of the most common traps. We'll think about monitoring impact as well, tracking as you go. I think probably next week I'll then move on to evidencing impact. So that's how you turn all of that monitoring and evaluation data into effectively a narrative that can convince someone else that you did indeed have impact. And I'll think in particular about some evidence from the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, a paper that I published with Bella Reichard and others, and some ongoing research I'm doing with Bella and others on our latest impact database. And where will I go from there? Maybe from there to the interviews, or just see where it goes. So let's dive into this episode on. I think I will call this on monitoring and evaluating impact. There we go. I'm not making this up entirely as I go along, honestly. But for me, the starting point when we want to understand our impact is to make sure that we are, in fact, monitoring and evaluating our impact. And this sounds like a bit of an obvious point to make at the beginning of a session like this, but it is remarkable how easy it is to fall into the trap of measuring the wrong stuff. And critically, the mistake people make is that they end up monitoring and evaluating their pathway or engagement or the technology or whatever it is, the mechanism that delivers the impact instead of the impact itself. And this is a major problem. It's going to cause you untold suffering. So pre-award plus post-award. So I was, in fact, I've served for a couple of years now on a UKRI funding panel for impact fellowships. And clearly, if you're applying for an impact fellowship, you need an impact objective, and you're going to get evaluated against those impact objectives. But last time that I served on this panel, about 50% of those applications did not contain a single impact objective. They clearly thought they got impact objectives, but they were engagement objectives instead. Oops, instantly unfundable. The other context is then research evaluation. So in a year out from the last REF deadline, I was reviewing case studies from across the sector. And at least 50% of those impact case studies, again, did not have any impact in them. They were engagement case studies instead. And again, these have gone through layers of pre-review before they get into someone like me. Clearly, the people writing these thought they were writing about impact, but they weren't. And as a result, they would have got very poor marks if submitted like that. And in fact, the work that I did with Bella, which I'll refer to next week, shows that the number one predictor of low scores in REF 2014 was people who made that mistake. They submitted an engagement rather than an impact case study. Of course, if you're in Australia, then that's great. Your evaluation system divides up engagement and impact very usefully so that you hopefully won't make that mistake. But for the rest of us, this is a confusing thing. And so if you're even just a little bit woolly about exactly what impact is, then you're going to potentially waste your time when it comes to monitoring and evaluating impact. So if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you'll know my definition of impact simply as benefit. Or to quote the Research Impact Handbook, the good that we as researchers do out there in the world. So remember, there's a venue for this. It's not academic impact on our colleagues within our institutions, in our teams, in our broader disciplinary networks. Yeah, I might measure that through citations and the like. We're looking here at non-academic benefits or good that comes from our research. And there is a value judgment there in this. And of course some subjectivity. And so in my paper in Research Policy from a few years ago now, this is 2021. This is the first peer-reviewed cross-disciplinary definition of impact. We have defined impact as both the demonstrable and or perceptible benefits that we get from research, to paraphrase slightly. But it is the point here is perception matters. It's not just what you can demonstrate, because demonstrate to whom? Against what set of criteria? Against what value system? This is much more subjective than we might want it to be. And of course, that is a problem when it comes to evaluation. I can't just have a single metric, a number that is going to tell me whether I got it right or not. I'm going to have to do something a bit more sophisticated. And so let's have a think about how we're going to do this then. So first of all, let's just clarify exactly what are the different types of impact that we might be wishing to demonstrate or perceive. So we've got a definition of impact as benefit. But let's apply this now to my typology. And in my Research Impact Handbook, you'll see 10 different types of impact. Each of these are things that you can track and evaluate. And most of us have our eyes fixed on the big prize of those things that might, in reality, be decades away. That actual reduction in marine plastic pollution, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that contributes towards tackling climate change. Yeah, one day. The economic gain that we might see, or the saving that we might see, other social, health and well-being, cultural impacts, things that take some time. But that ultimately, if we get there, then yeah, that's impressive. That's what's motivating me and the people that I'm working with. These are the problems in society we're trying to resolve. And so, yes, that might be your end point. But it is always worth keeping track of what you're doing as you go, even although the initial impacts might be less significant, less far-reaching, less impressive. So that, A, we've got something to show when someone comes asking, well, what was your impact? Especially if things take longer than we expected. But B, because we can start already to trace causal pathways or causal chains between our impacts. So starting with some of the earliest impacts that you might see, my research might change people's understanding and awareness. And if I can generate enough data around this to explain why it is so important that people understand that thing that they didn't understand before, I can claim that as an impact. But that then might also be part of capacity building. I build skills on top of that. People can now do things they couldn't do before. And these are weak because, well, I want to know what people did with that understanding or capacity and how that has now benefited them perhaps in more instrumental ways. But that might initially be a change in attitudes. That then might change behaviour. Some of those behaviours might be decisions. Some of those decisions might be policies. It could be guidelines. It could be strategies. It could be national policy. Who knows? And maybe that's what ultimately leads to those health and well-being impacts, those environmental benefits, or whatever it was that we kind of had in mind at the start. And so the first, and I guess the most important lesson that you need to understand about evaluating your impact is that this is about tracing causal pathways, trying to define cause and effect relationships when the cause is your research and the effect is your impact. So I'm going to dive into these ideas, these concepts around evaluation in a moment. But before I do that, as I said earlier, we want to start by planning our impact systematically and thinking about what this might ultimately look like. What would success look like for a project like this? And so I start with my impact planning template as the first port of call for any project that wants to A, achieve impact, but B, think at the outset about how you might ultimately monitor and evaluate that. And so as I build those impact goals with the people that might benefit from this, and do remember, this is not my entry point for impact. My entry point is a 3 I's analysis. We're going to analyse who might be relevant and why, and reach out to those people, and then with them plan our impact. So we are with these people, maybe in a workshop, maybe after having had a bunch of conversations, we're planning our impact. And I've got some impact goals. I know why they're going to resonate, who's going to benefit from them, the kind of activities that we can tailor to each of those different groups. And as we discuss this, I begin to put some colour and shape and flavour to this in terms of, what would success look like? How do we know this has worked? What might be some indicators? What could you count? What would people say if you spoke to them? And now we've got some impact indicators. Now, at this point, when I do this with people, I usually discover that there's a bit of a problem. Most of the things people write down are actually indicators of engagement. Again, that same trap that we can fall into. And so you'll see in my impact planning template, I've got 2 columns side by side, indicators of engagement and indicators of impact. And I do this for 2 reasons. One is to make sure you're not getting confused starting from scratch again now. But okay, if that's the impact, the engagement indicators, what would success actually look like? What might be some indicators of impact? And I make sure that I've got both and I'm not measuring the wrong thing. But secondly, it is actually important to understand if your engagement is working, because if it's not working, then you're probably not going to get impact. And that gives you formative feedback that can help you keep your pathway to impact on track and adapt as necessary to make sure that the engagement is going well. And hopefully you are on track to get those impacts ultimately. And so I am going to now track and monitor specific things that I'm going to be looking for throughout my research project now. And I might have a list of these. I might check in once a quarter with my team and ask everyone, maybe color code these as red, amber, green. Yeah, making progress on these. Not so much on those. Do we need to do something there? So have that idea of what you're looking for and look for it on a regular basis. Systematize this if you can in your research projects and your project planning. So you're tracking this in a fairly planned way. That planning process also helps you to identify if you need a baseline against which to compare change before and after your intervention, your project, whatever it might be. Maybe, in fact, I need more than a baseline. I need a control group. And maybe actually I now change the design of the research so that we can make sure we've got that evidence. So making a plan to track your engagement and your impact as you go is really important. And it will help you to do better research as well as actually collect the data you need and do the planning for that up front and give you some nice formative feedback. But at this point, it's also worth pointing out that there is a bit of a limitation to this approach, which is that it's really linear. And because it is so planned, you might miss some of the non-linear, unexpected things that actually happen in the messy reality that is any research project. So yeah, that's what we expected to happen. That's what we thought success would look like. But in fact, people have used our work in some really mysteriously strange ways that seem to be working for them. Maybe we need to go and research why it's working. But ultimately, people love this, and this is how it's working. And great, we've got some other unexpected benefits. But of course, also, we may well start to see some unexpected, negative, unintended consequences as well. And we need to be able to track those things as we go. So we need some kind of system, some kind of approach, some way of on a kind of day-to-day basis, proactively working out what's going on without having to look for specific things in case we're looking for the wrong stuff. So how do you do that? And there's no one right answer to this, but it's essentially about being observant, number one, and number two, systematically making sure that you keep track of those things you observe and you can find them later. So any kind of impact tracking or monitoring system per se, for me, its starting point is simply some kind of place you can put things you notice that might be impact. And I call this the dumping ground approach to impact monitoring. And we will think about some much more sophisticated approaches to this. I've got an interview coming up with 3 people who have 3 different approaches and some software to help you with this, to take whatever you might dump very quickly and easily into whatever your dumping ground is going to be, and then put this into a system that's going to be much easier for you to track, exactly what's going on. What do I need to do next? How can I turn this now into a narrative, a story that might work as evidence? But this first starting point is a dumping ground because the reality is if the starting point is some new bit of software, some fancy, maybe slightly complicated system, then you're probably not going to use this on a day-to-day basis. Some of us will. Maybe your university's got the Pure Impact module on already. And if you like Pure and that's easy for you, great. And it'll save you time because someone's probably going to come along and ask you to do that later anyway. But for most of us, logging onto a system, loading up a page, whatever it might be, it's just those few little steps. Yes, it's seconds, but it's enough to make me say, not now. And keep scrolling on the social media. Keep working through my emails. I'm under time pressure after all. So I'm looking for something that, in less than a second, I can fire off from my email, I can clip, send off, whatever from my social media without interrupting my workflow, that therefore I'm actually going to do. And the message, and the important message at this point is, do something. Come up with some kind of dumping ground that is going to work for you. And worry later about what you're going to do to systematize that, make this easy to access, make sense of it all, and listen to the episode that's coming up on that. But come up with some kind of plan, not nothing, because you will thank yourself later. And you've maybe already been in this situation, but if you haven't, I can guarantee you someone is going to come and ask you what was your impact. And if you haven't got some kind of system, some kind of at least a dumping ground, if not something a bit more sophisticated, then you are going to be sitting there scratching your head, going through your memory, trying to remember, what was it? In fact, I can see this guy's face. Was it that meeting or was it that other meeting? I'm now scrolling through my diary. I'm sure I took his card, but what did I do with it? I've got no idea. And it's frustrating, it's time-consuming, it's painful. I'm trawling through emails now, looking for all of this evidence because I remember this stuff, but it's kind of a bit vague. And if I'm lucky, I find the evidence. If I'm not, it's gone. And the result is that impact reporting, when that time comes around, ResearchFish in the UK is a system we use. That window is just closed, and I've done mine like a good boy. And it was fairly painless. How painless was it for you? And my suggestion is that you can make this whole process a lot more painless and efficient by just having a thought right now about what you're going to do. So, what do you do? And can I start to problematize what you might be doing? So, a lot of people tell me, well, actually, yeah, I email this stuff to myself. And it's not a bad solution because it's quick and it's easy. You can email pretty much anything to yourself nowadays. And if you are doing this, a little tip is add in the phrase #impact to the subject line or somewhere, and then with one keyword search, wherever it may be, even if you didn't quite get round to putting them into your impact folder, I can see everything that is there. Great. So, nice, simple solution. But there is a slight problem here, and that problem is that only you can see what's in your email. So your teams can't see this. Professional services teams, so research and professional services teams can't see it. Once you move university, that moves with you. Nobody else can see any of that. And of course, they may want to claim your impact, but now the evidence has moved with you as well. And what if it turns out, and I've even in the current day and age that we live in, I've recently heard a story of someone who had their email settings wrong. It was all on their computer, not backed up to a server. They lost their computer or something went wrong and they lost all their emails. It's always possible. So if you are attracted to the email solution, my workaround is find some kind of system where you can fire emails into that system. All three systems that I'll look at in a couple of weeks' time with the interviews that are coming up have that functionality. So I can just, without leaving my email, I can fire emails into that system. And they're all there. None of them are categorized. I've not done anything with them yet, but they're sitting there waiting and they're not lost, crucially. And of course, I can do the same with social media. I'm scrolling through, someone's mentioned me, someone's used my research in this report, interesting, don't have time to read it now, but I will just share via email to that system. And if you don't have a fancy system and you want something, then I use the app Evernote. Microsoft has a similar app called OneNote. There are lots of other competing apps like this that will enable you to email stuff into your Note app. Great. Really simple, and with a little shortcut in my email, less than a second, I've just fired that off without interrupting my workflow. Great. Job done. Another thing that a lot of people tell me that they do when it comes to impact tracking or monitoring is that they have an extended CV. So here's my CV. It's just a personal version of this, and I just pile anything in here that I might want to say. Yeah. So I got a teaching award. Great, it goes in there. I got some media engagement. Yeah, I'll stick it in there. A lot of the stuff, when it comes to an impact case study, most of that media engagement, not relevant, but it's there. You never know, it might be useful. So I pile that in. I've got a very long extended CV. And great. But the problem, again, is only I have access to this. Instead, if I turned that into something that's a little bit less personal, so it's not my entire CV, but it is still a document, and it's now a Google Doc or some other kind of shared document. Maybe it's a Google Sheet if I want to organize it in that kind of way, depending on my preference. And now I can share that with my team. And every quarter, as we check in on those indicators, I'm asking everyone, here's the link again. Has anyone got any impacts? Anyone done any interesting engagement? Write it in here. And I'm capturing opportunistically all of those things that are happening from my team. Everyone has access to that. And now this is not just me. I've got a bunch of people helping me with this as well. And of course, I can make that available to my professional services colleagues, others in my institution. And it's backed up and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, great. Some people have this online. So I met someone recently who said, I've got a website where I collate all my impact. Certain things you can't really put on your website, but it is a nice way of kind of motivating yourself to put stuff on there because you might get some added value from this in terms of your visibility, perhaps. maybe it's printing stuff out, putting it into a folder. One gentleman I met when I was doing some training, he came with a big box folder, put it on the desk with a bit of a bang, and said, "That's my impact." So yeah, if I'm allergic to all of these electronic forms of collating this stuff, yeah, that's an option. That could work as well. I think the message I'm trying to get across here is do something. Just don't do nothing. Make sure it's backed up. Make sure ideally this is something that can be accessed by others. And stick it there, but just keep this going day to day. Make this part of just what you do. I see something, I observe, I store it somewhere I can come back to later. And don't worry for now that's a bit messy. Like I said, it's a dumping ground. But we're going to come up with a few. I've already given you a few ways that you can organise this. In my Evernote, for example, I can put this into different folders for different projects or different case studies and such like. As a very basic form of systematization, but more coming on that. So I've been kind of going for quite a while, but I think I'm going to maybe kind of wrap up at this point by just giving you the basics on impact evaluation. And I think what I'll do in the next episode is to dive into this with a few more examples. But I promised that I would give you both monitoring and evaluation. And we get what impact is now. We are evaluating the benefits that arise from our research, not just the engagement. But we probably will also evaluate the engagement as well. We've got a sense of what's happening. We're collecting this as we go. We've got a strategic approach to this so that we know what we're looking for, but we're also opportunistically just observing and recording what we've got. Okay, so far so good. So impact evaluation. I'm going to draw from my 2021 research policy paper here, and this is a paraphrase of the definition that we included in that paper, which is that impact evaluation is a process of assessing the significance and reach of both positive and negative effects of research. And a couple of things I want to draw out of this. The first is that this is not only about assessing the reach, and this is often self-evident, especially if you've used social media, for example, to achieve impact. That might be easy, but reach without any evidence of significance is, I would argue, completely meaningless. I've reached the entire world, but it didn't really work. Or I reached the entire world, but actually there were as many negative side effects as there were benefits, and I've actually now got a global disaster on my hand. So great reach, and significance. And we look at both of these separately, and we have a line of monitoring and evaluation data for both of these. But also, on a moral basis, I think it's really important that we check whether there is both a positive and a negative effect from our research. And I've used that word effect there because impact is just one of those confusing words. In kind of common language, common usage, I should say, impact generally means something negative. But in research terms, we mean generally something positive. But actually, it could be positive or negative. Confusing. Impact, in terms of research impact, is the positive form of this, the benefits. And that's why your funders may not be interested. In fact, they usually aren't interested in the negative impacts. Research Fish, for example, I think problematically, does not ask any of us for what went wrong. And even if Research Fish doesn't ask that, our funders really should be asking that. They have a stake in knowing if things are going wrong, so that they can change what they're doing and maybe even help us to course correct and undo wrongs. But the reality is people are not going to ask you for this, so you need to ask yourself for this information. What has gone wrong? And in fact, it's very often only when you explicitly ask that question that people start opening up and saying, well, yeah, thanks for all the benefits, but here's what also didn't go quite so well. So check ask this in both the positive and the negative form, and make sure you are gathering monitoring and evaluation data on both the significance and reach of those positive and negative effects. So, as I said, this is about identifying causal links between your research as the cause and your impact as the effect. But very rarely does your research directly lead to impact. It's often a bit more indirect and non-linear and messy, and very often there will be a pathway. So we raised awareness, that changed understanding, and then to attitude, and then to behaviours and decisions. We maybe built a technology, we commercialised it, we made sure it was working, and now here's the evidence that we have that impact. And ultimately, when I'm turning this into a narrative as impact, I may minimise that pathway, because what I ultimately need is that causal relationship between research and impact. And the only role, effectively, that pathway plays is in attributing our research to our impact. So as far as is necessary, I will add into that narrative some of those steps, those links in the chain that pertain to my pathway. But we're as soon as possible getting into the research through this pathway led to this initial impact, which then led to this next impact, which subsequently impacted on that. And great. And of course, as we go further down the line, impacts evolve, they develop, they mature over time. And the longer this goes, the more likely we are to have more impressive, more significant and far-reaching impacts. But equally, as that timeline matures, we will have more and more confounding factors. Other things that went on that also contribute to the impact, which means that it starts to become increasingly tenuous as to whether or not really I can say that ultimate impact on people's health, public health, for example, was that me and our research, or all these other things that were built on top of it? And of course, we need to make sure we're not overselling this. But ultimately, the good news is that our task, when we are evaluating impact, is to create an evidence-based argument that our research was sufficient or necessary to generate the claimed impact. This is not typically, or it can be, but it's not typically a direct link. It's not sole attribution. You can't say, without our research, this would not have happened. But you can typically say, our research made a significant contribution to this impact. Without our research, yes, it might have happened, but it wouldn't have happened as big, as efficiently, as effectively. We wouldn't have seen that or the next thing. And so we are able to now hopefully disentangle this to the extent that we can explain the extent and the nature of our contribution, among, yes, many other things, to that impact. And yes, it's imprecise, it's approximate, but it's an argument that you have to build. And the good news is that this is our day job. We build evidence-based arguments, and that is exactly your task when you are trying to achieve impact, when you're trying to evaluate impact. And the way in which we demonstrate rigour when we are doing this is not typically large N samples, it's not statistics, it's none of that stuff, although it can be. Typically, this is the social science conception of triangulation. I'm going to check this from multiple different perspectives. And all of these different perspectives, these different data sources, these different angles, all point to the same reality. And once I've got three or four of these all pointing in the same direction, this is believable, this is credible, this is rigorous enough. So this is my attempt to introduce you to this whole realm of monitoring, evaluating and evidencing impact. We clearly know what it is that we are trying to measure in all of this. We're measuring it as we go, we're monitoring, we're evaluating. We're doing this in quick and easy ways that we are going to actually do day to day as we observe and just quickly store this away for future reference. And now we're going to try and more systematically think about how we might be able to prove that our research at least contributed significantly towards that ultimate impact. And next week, I'm going to think about this in more depth. I'm going to go much more deeply into that paper from Research Policy, my methodological framework for evaluating impact. We're going to think about some of the methods. I'll give you some worked examples, a variety of different mixed methods designs for doing this. We'll think about testimonial interviews, how you do them, how you do them effectively, some of the traps you can fall into there. I'll reference some of the stuff I'll be talking to in a few weeks' time with Rachel Blanche, one of the co-authors of my paper, around arts-based methods, and inspire you. But ultimately, my hope is that already today, and by the end of this series, you will feel empowered to evaluate your research in ways that are going to convince an audience that, yes, you indeed did have impact. And more than just empowering you and enabling you to do that, I hope I'm going to start exciting you and get you to realize, you know what, this isn't actually as hard as I thought. And in fact, maybe even there could be some win-wins back to my research. And I get the creative juices flowing and impact evaluation start to become something that I might actually even want to do. So I hope you're looking forward to all of this as much as I am. I'm going to finish this here for now, but hopefully that's been a useful introduction to this whole realm of impact monitoring, evaluation, and evidence.